She covered her sister's shift as a maid, but destiny led her to a lonely millionaire who needed her. The storm rolled into Brooklyn faster than the forecast had warned, cloaking the sky in heavy layers of gray. Rain came down in sheets, slapping hard against the windows of the aging third-floor walk-up where Emily Tran lived. Thunder grumbled in the distance, making the thin window panes tremble. Inside, Emily sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor, leaning close to a weak space heater that buzzed faintly. A thick medical textbook sat open in her lap. Clinical diagnostics, her final hurdle before graduation. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights, and a forgotten cup of instant noodles sat nearby, cold and soggy. She was still wearing her clinical scrubs, with an old hoodie thrown over them for warmth. Her highlighter skimmed the same sentence for the third time, but her mind refused to focus. Then her phone vibrated. The screen lit up with one name. Nina. "Hey, sis," Emily answered quickly. On the other end came a shaky, breathless voice. I fell. I can't walk. My ankle. It's swollen. I can't make it to my shift tonight." "What shift?" Emily straightened up. "New client. A mansion in the Hamptons. Trial night tonight. Can you go for me?" Emily paused. "You know my exam's tomorrow morning." "I know, but it's just basic cleaning. They've never seen me. You can pretend to be me. Uniform's clean. ID's in the pocket. Just show up, tidy up a bit, and leave." Emily glanced around the tiny apartment they shared. One coat rack for both their jackets, 2 worn-out backpacks hanging on the door, a drafty window stuffed with towels. Winter was coming. If Nina lost this client, she'd lose the steady work that came with them. Emily exhaled slowly. "Fine, text me the address." "Thank you," Nina whispered just before the call ended. Emily stood up fast, knowing hesitation would change her mind. She pulled out the pressed gray uniform, clipped the badge marked N Tran to the front, tied her hair back, and splashed cold water on her face. Then she threw on a raincoat, grabbed a broken umbrella, and stepped out into the stormy night. The subway rumbled away from Brooklyn, carrying Emily farther from crowded sidewalks and broken street lamps. Rain still poured relentlessly. By the time she emerged from the last station, her pants were soaked from the knees down. A taxi picked her up at the curb and drove through tree-lined roads into the quiet wealth of the Hamptons. The car rolled to a smooth stop in front of a grand estate, tucked behind stone walls and towering trees. Emily stepped out, her broken umbrella flipping inside out the second it met the wind. She gave up on it, head low, hurrying up the stone path. The mansion looked like something pulled from a Gothic novel. Gray stone walls, grand columns, a black slate roof dripping with rain. Lights glowed from inside, but not warmly. The house felt asleep, still and unwelcome. Emily stood at the heavy wooden door, her fingers tightening around the slick handle. Her heart pounded in her chest. Before she could knock, the door creaked open. A tall man stood in the entryway, haloed by soft light. He wore a slightly wrinkled white shirt, collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. His jaw was sharp, his brown hair dusted with gray at the temples. His eyes were tired, deep but alert. He scanned her, uniform, name badge, umbrella dripping on the porch. "You're from the cleaning service?" His voice was low and direct. Emily froze for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I'm Nina." His eyes flicked to her badge briefly, then back to her face. "You're late." "Sorry," she murmured. He stepped aside. "Just the first floor, living room and library. No need to go upstairs." Emily nodded quickly and stepped inside. The door shut behind her with a soft but solid thud. The interior was stunning, but cold. High ceilings, polished wood floors, elegant crown molding, and artwork she couldn't begin to afford. But there were no flowers, no scent of food, no warmth, just silence. Emily entered the living room and set her cleaning bag down. She began wiping down surfaces with steady hands, focusing on each movement. Then she heard it, a soft shuffle, like bare feet on wood. She turned. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, stood in the doorway. Pale skin, soft brown hair, serious gray eyes, too grown up for his age. He clutched a worn teddy bear in one hand, the other dangling at his side. Emily froze, then offered a gentle smile. "Hi there?" He didn't respond, just tilted his head slightly. "I'm just here to clean a bit. What's your name?" Still silence. He stared, curious but guarded. Emily reached into her pocket, pulled out a tissue, and folded it quickly into a paper airplane. "Want to see something cool?" The boy's eyes followed her hand as she launched it gently. It fluttered down, landing near his feet. He bent, picked it up, and examined it closely. A tiny smile tugged at his lips. Emily's heart melted. Behind her, a voice said, "He never smiles for strangers." She turned sharply. The man stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He wasn't frowning, but he wasn't smiling either. "I didn't mean to bother him," she said quickly. "You didn't," his voice calm. "He's just cautious. That's all." The boy looked between them, still clutching the paper plane. Emily returned to cleaning, eyes lowered. But Julian didn't leave. He stayed, watching quietly from the threshold. And for the first time in years, in a house filled with silence, something shifted. He didn't feel completely alone anymore. Emily hadn't expected that small paper airplane to earn her a smile. But it did. It was fleeting, subtle, just a tiny upward curve at the corners of the boy's mouth. But it was real. She hadn't even had time to process it before she heard a familiar voice behind her. Julian Ward, the quiet man with watchful eyes. He stood at the doorway as if unsure whether to interrupt the moment. Emily gave a small nod, avoiding his gaze, and returned to wiping the glass table. She could feel his eyes on her, not cold, but guarded. The way someone might study a character from a story they hadn't decided how to write yet. She kept working, moving methodically from one shelf to another. Leo didn't leave. He crept closer, sitting cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, still holding his teddy bear and the paper airplane. Now and then, Emily glanced his way and offered a gentle smile. He said nothing, but didn't leave. That alone felt like something enormous. Around 7 o'clock, Julian appeared again, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. He paused at the doorway. "You're still here?" he asked. Emily jumped to her feet. "I was just finishing up." Julian looked at Leo, who was now standing right beside her, eyes expectant. "My chef's off tonight," Julian said. "I'm cooking. Simple meal. The boy asked if you'd stay for dinner." Leo gave a tiny, serious nod, then took Emily's hand. She hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "Spaghetti," Julian said, already turning. "It's not an invitation to a gala, just a meal." Emily looked down at Leo's small hand still holding hers. She nodded. "Okay, but just one meal." The dining room was long and elegant, but tonight it felt human. A gentle aroma of tomato sauce lingered in the air. On the table, 3 plain white plates, a bowl of salad, a bottle of water. Julian brought out the pasta himself. Leo climbed into his seat, clearly used to quiet meals with just his father. Julian gestured for Emily to take the chair next to Leo. She sat, still unsure of her place here. "Not going to ask if I usually invite cleaning staff to dinner?" Julian said, pouring water. Emily shrugged. "Only the ones who fold paper airplanes." A soft laugh escaped him. The sound eased something in the air. Dinner was quiet, but not tense. Leo ate with more enthusiasm than she'd expected, and leaned toward her to whisper, "You eat slow?" Julian looked up, startled. He doesn't usually talk to anyone. Emily smiled, tilting her head. Maybe I have special spaghetti energy." Julian studied her a moment. It wasn't quite trust in his eyes, but something had shifted. After dinner, Emily instinctively began clearing plates. Julian didn't stop her. When she reached for her coat, Leo was already there, waiting. "Can you read me a story?" he asked, voice barely audible. Emily blinked. "Me?" He nodded, still holding her hand. She turned to Julian. He stood still, arms crossed, then gave a slight nod. "Second room on the left." She followed Leo upstairs. His room was painted a pale sky blue with a moon-shaped nightlight and low bookshelves. She helped him onto the bed, picked a story about a bear who couldn't sleep through winter. Halfway through, Leo's head tilted until it rested against her arm. He clutched both his teddy and the paper airplane. By the final sentence, his breathing had slowed, deep and steady. Emily gently closed the book and turned. Julian stood in the doorway, silent. She rose slowly, brushing Leo's hair back before stepping into the hallway. Julian's voice was soft. "Thank you." "For what?" He looked toward his son. "For giving him that. He hasn't let anyone into his room since—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emily understood. Emily didn't think she would see them again. When she left that house that night, her heart hadn't yet found the right name for what she felt. But the image of the boy sleeping with a paper airplane in hand and the man standing silently at the doorway had lingered in her mind long after. Then the call came. Julian had asked the cleaning service to send Nina again, the name on the badge that night. But when the line reached the real Nina, she only laughed softly. "He's looking for you," Nina said, a hint of teasing in her voice. "I gave him your number. The rest is your call." Emily hesitated. She had exams coming, hospital rotations, an overflowing to-do list. But her heart kept pulling toward that quiet house in the Hamptons, where a little boy had smiled when she folded a paper airplane. In the end, she called back. Julian's voice was the same, low to the point, but with something different this time. Softer. "I'd like to invite you back," he said. "Not for cleaning, but to be with Leo. Help him study. Play. He responds well to you." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, steadier than she felt, "I'll come, but only after my classes. And no extra pay. I'm not doing this for money." "As you wish," Julian replied. She thought she heard the ghost of a smile. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Each afternoon after classes, Emily made the familiar train ride to the estate. She changed into her gray uniform, pinned on the badge that still read Nina, now part of a quiet understanding between them. She cooked on the nights the chef was off, grilled cheese, tomato soup, soft-boiled eggs. She helped Leo color-code his books, fold his socks into pairs, and build blanket forts in his room. She was the only one who knew he liked his teddy bear to lie facing left. "So the bear can hear my heartbeat." Julian saw all of it, from his office doorway, from the top of the stairs, from the balcony of his room. He didn't interfere. He didn't ask. He simply watched. And each night when he returned home, the house was no longer silent. There was laughter, tiny footsteps on carpet, and sometimes Emily's voice reading a bedtime story. He started coming home earlier. One evening, Emily found an old photo frame tucked between Leo's books. She dusted it off and placed it gently on his desk. It held a photo of a woman with soft eyes holding a newborn, Leo's mother. Another night, she spotted Leo's old teddy bear, torn at the ear, sitting in a donation box. She didn't say anything, just stitched it up and set it back on his pillow. She never mentioned these things. But Julian noticed. Little by little, the house stopped being a cold, lifeless space. It started breathing. The smell of toast in the evenings, warm light spilling from the kitchen, tiny footprints on freshly cleaned rugs. Julian, once a ghost in his own home, began to pause. to listen, to feel. Emily never asked about his wife. She didn't pry. She didn't push. She was simply there, like warmth settling in after a long winter. And Leo, once quiet, afraid of the dark, began telling messy, winding stories that only children understood. Began dragging books into the living room, just to show Miss Emily this one picture. He began to laugh, often. Julian saw it most clearly on a Friday evening when he walked through the door and found his son curled in Emily's lap, crumbs of a broken cookie in his hand, laughing with his whole face. Emily was reading a comic in a dinosaur voice. Julian stood there, his tie loose, still holding his keys, and for the first time in years, his heart didn't ache when he came home. From quiet dinners and simple routines, Emily had become part of the most tender hours of Leo's day, the nights when he was no longer afraid of the dark. Emily quickly realized that nighttime in the house held a different kind of silence. There were no footsteps, no kitchen sounds, just shadows stretching long across the walls. And Leo, more often than not, would wake in the middle of the night, calling softly for his mom, clinging to his teddy bear, trembling. One evening, after the third restless night that week, Emily sat down beside his bed with a small cloth bag in hand. "We're going to do some magic," she whispered. She pulled out glow-in-the-dark paper, markers, and scissors. Slowly, she began cutting stars, moons, and constellations, chatting gently as she taped them around the walls. Leo watched her in wide-eyed silence. "That's Orion," she said, pointing to a cluster of stars. "They say he's strong and protects people while they sleep." "What about that one?" Leo asked, pointing at a spiral. "That's Lyra," she smiled. "Her light carries music from heaven." Leo paused, then whispered, "Like Mom?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, like a lullaby she's sending down so you don't have to be afraid anymore." He smiled, small but real. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "I will," she said softly. Julian stood just outside the room, blending into the dim hallway. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Through the barely open door, he watched as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor beside Leo's bed, her arm gently draped around the boy. She was reading, voice low and warm, bathed in the faint green glow of paper stars. Leo whispered the constellation names after her, Orion, Lyra, and soon his breaths grew slower, deeper. Julian turned away, but something inside him stayed there. From that night on, a new star appeared on Leo's wall every evening. The room that once held fear now shimmered with quiet comfort. Emily didn't change things dramatically. She simply showed up, consistently, patiently, gently. Julian began to stay longer. Sometimes at the dinner table, listening to Emily and Leo discuss why robin eggs were blue. Sometimes in the library, quietly handing Emily an old children's book, one his wife had once loved reading. They didn't talk much, but their glances began to linger. One rainy evening, Emily arrived soaked, her coat dripping. Her hands shook slightly as she set down the soup. Julian noticed first. "You're sick," he said, no room for debate. "I'm fine, really, just go lie down, now." Leo looked up, concerned. "My bear can protect you." Emily gave a weak laugh, but obeyed without protest. Julian cooked porridge, something he hadn't done in years. He brought it up with a cool cloth and sat beside her. When she stirred, half asleep, she murmured, "Dad?" He froze. "I miss him," she whispered, eyes still closed. "It's been so long." Julian didn't say a word, but something deep within him shifted. A few days later, when Emily had recovered, she came downstairs and found a small box on the table. Inside, fresh glow paper, markers, child-safe scissors. "Leo said you needed more supplies for your magic," Julian said, eyes not quite meeting hers. Emily smiled and almost cried. But sometimes, just when everything starts to feel right, the truth comes knocking. and this time it didn't knock gently. That morning, the estate was as quiet and serene as ever. Emily dusted shelves in the library while Leo colored beside her, humming a tune she'd taught him the day before. Soft sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting the room in calm. Then the doorbell rang. Leo perked up first. "Is it Daddy?" he asked hopefully. Emily shook her head, wiped her hands, and walked to the front door. Standing there was a middle-aged man in a gray suit, holding a clipboard. His face was polite, but firm. "Good morning. I'm the regional manager with Everbright Cleaning Services. I'm here for a routine check-in. This residence is assigned to one of our cleaners, Nina Tran. Is that correct?" Emily froze. Yes," she stammered. The man flipped a few pages. "And you are Nina?" Her throat tightened. Before she could respond, a small voice chirped behind her. "That's Miss Emily." She turned sharply. Leo stood at the end of the hall, still holding a green crayon, smiling innocently. The man narrowed his eyes. "Miss Emily? I don't have an Emily in our records." Emily opened her mouth, trying to form a sentence, but her voice failed. "What's going on here?" Julian's voice echoed through the hallway. He had just stepped inside, coat over his arm. Seeing Emily's expression and the man beside her, he walked over. "I'm Julian Ward," he said. "Is there a problem?" The manager straightened. "Mr. Ward, the cleaner assigned here is Nina Tran, but this woman, Emily, according to your son, is not in our employee database. Her badge is also not an official reissue." Julian turned toward Emily, his expression shifting. "Is this true?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm sorry. Nina's my sister. She hurt her ankle, and I just filled in that first night. I never planned to stay, but then you called again. And Leo—" "So you lied?" Julian's voice was low, quiet, but sharp. "I just wanted to help. I didn't think it would turn into this. I didn't mean to—" "You came into my home under false pretenses. You let my son get attached. You let me—" He didn't finish the sentence. Leo stepped forward, eyes wide. "Daddy, are you mad at Miss Emily?" Emily knelt. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I never meant to lie to you. I just wanted to be there for you. I care about you." "Are you leaving?" Leo whispered. Tears blurred her vision. "I have to." Julian's voice was clipped. "We'll make other arrangements tomorrow. You should go." Emily stood still for a moment, stunned. Then she nodded. Leo ran to her, clutching her hand. "Don't go. You didn't finish the star stories?" Emily held him tight, kissed his forehead. "I love you, sweetheart, but I can't stay." She turned, stepping into the rain, leaving behind the boy she had come to love, and the man whose trust she had unknowingly broken. The door closed behind her, quiet as a sigh. And just like that, the silence returned. The moment the door closed, the light that once lived in that house disappeared with it. The estate had returned to its former silence, not peaceful silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind. Julian walked the long hallway, hearing nothing but the echo of his own footsteps. The kitchen light no longer flicked on in the evenings. There were no smells of toasted bread, no quiet laughter from Leo's room. Everything had happened too fast, but the emptiness afterward lingered, cold and persistent, like a winter draft seeping through the walls. Leo was the first to say what Julian couldn't. "Dad!" He stood at the office doorway, teddy bear in hand. "Is Miss Emily coming back?" Julian paused, buttoning his shirt, then knelt down to face him. "No, buddy, she's not coming back." Leo's eyes filled. "But she said she'd finished the star stories. She said Lyra is Mom's song." Julian closed his eyes. The boy's words pierced something deep and soft inside him. That night, after putting Leo to bed, Julian poured a drink, but didn't touch it. He sat in the library, half his face lit by a reading lamp, fingers brushing the spine of a book Emily once read aloud. He thought about the way she'd mended Leo's bear, how she'd dusted off the photo frame and set it back in place, how she never asked about the woman in the photo, but still understood everything without a word. She'd seen the pain even he had tried to ignore. And he had called her a liar, accused her of using them. Julian clenched his fist to fight the sting behind his eyes. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in Leo's empty room for hours, holding the same paper airplane Emily had folded weeks ago. He thought about her voice, the stars on the ceiling, the way Leo had stopped waking up crying. The guilt pressed down on him, not because she lied, but because he hadn't cared to ask why. The next morning, he left the house earlier than usual, not to go to the office, not to meet with his editor. He drove across town to a small medical school Nina had once mentioned. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for. Maybe just to see that she was okay. Maybe to answer the question that had haunted him all night. Was any of it real? He got his answer faster than expected. Through the large glass of a student clinic, Julian spotted her. Emily sat at a small table with a young boy, no older than 6. The boy had a bandage around his head and was holding a crayon, scribbling something while she leaned in close. She smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear when someone's watching, but the kind that came from somewhere warm and steady, the same way she'd smiled at Leo. Julian stepped closer to the door, but couldn't bring himself to open it. He stood there, watching, silent. The girl who had softened his son's world, who had breathed warmth into their home, was just being herself. She hadn't faked a thing. She was kindness given freely, gentle, patient, and brave enough to love broken things. And he'd been too afraid to believe it. For the first time in years, Julian felt shame. Not because she had lied to him once, but because he hadn't trusted what was real right in front of him. He turned and walked away. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had been wrong. But some people, even after they walk out of your life, leave marks that never fade. Emily was that kind of person, and Julian, though he had turned away from the clinic door without saying a word, carried something with him that he could no longer deny. He needed her back. Not just for Leo, not just because the house had grown too quiet again, but because for the first time in years he didn't want to live without the light she brought into his world. And as Leo's birthday approached, Julian knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Leo's birthday arrived on one of those rare, golden May mornings. Sunlight poured over the backyard lawn where a few blue ribbons fluttered on tree branches. There was no big party, no balloons, no loud music. Just a small cake, a wooden table with 3 chairs, and 2 people, one big, one small, waiting for something they hadn't dared to name. Julian stood by the window, adjusting his collar in the reflection. He glanced at the garden, his chest tight with a nervousness he hadn't felt in years, not since waiting for his wife to walk down the aisle. Leo kept darting in and out. "Dad, I don't think she's coming." Julian didn't answer. He checked his watch, then looked at his son. "Just believe." Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. Julian didn't move. Leo did. He flung open the door, and for a moment, time paused. Emily stood there, holding a small gift wrapped in pale blue paper. Her hair was tied back, her smile soft. Still Emily, but not quite the same girl who'd once walked into this house in the rain. She hesitated. "You didn't have to invite me." But Leo didn't let her finish. He threw his arms around her, burying his face into her coat. "You came," he whispered, hugging her tight. Then, softer, "Did Mommy send you back?" Emily held him tight, her arms trembling at his words. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I brought you something very special." Julian stepped out from the doorway, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "I didn't invite you out of politeness," he said quietly. "I invited you because I want you here." Emily turned to him, surprised. Julian walked closer, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He didn't kneel. There were no candles, no diamond sparkle, just a simple gold band. "This isn't a proposal," he said softly. "It's a promise. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll get everything right. But I know one thing." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I want you here, not as help, not as a guest, but as part of this family. If you'll have us?" Emily said nothing at first. She looked down at the small gift in her hand and passed it to Leo. "I think this one fits you perfectly." Leo opened it, a glowing constellation lamp shaped like Lyra, with a small switch that played soft lullaby music. "Mom's song," he whispered, eyes wide. Emily looked back at Julian, tears now slipping freely. "I don't need a ring to know I belong here," she said softly. "But if you need me to hold it to believe it, I will." She stepped into his arms, and he wrapped her in a long, quiet embrace, like he'd been waiting a lifetime. Leo squirmed between them, hugging both tightly. "So Miss Emily's staying?" "Staying," Julian said, resting his hand on both their backs. "For a long, long time." And for the first time since he'd lost his wife, the house felt whole again. Golden light blanketed the backyard as the sun dipped behind the trees. The final rays of the day danced across the grass, lighting up 3 figures sitting beneath the open sky: a man, a woman, and a little boy with the brightest smile in the world. Leo squealed with laughter as Julian chased him with a giant cardboard airplane. Emily sat nearby with a box of markers, drawing wobbly shapes on a whiteboard made from the birthday cake box lid. "Your son looks like a fried egg." Leo giggled, running over. Emily puffed her cheeks. "Then you do it, Mr. Artist. I surrender." Julian dropped onto the grass beside them, panting like he'd run a marathon. He unbuttoned his cuffs, wiped his forehead, and looked at the two of them like someone who had finally found the missing piece of a puzzle. Leo looked up at the sky, now turning a deep blue. "Miss Emily," he whispered, "do you think Mommy's watching us?" Emily turned, her smile soft. "I do. I think she's up there somewhere, sitting by Lyra, listening to your laughter." Leo nodded solemnly. "Then she must be laughing really loud right now." Julian reached out and took Emily's hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Their eyes met. And in that moment, there was no doubt left. And then all 3 of them laid back on the grass, gazing up at the early stars. The breeze carried the scent of leftover cake and the sound of quiet breathing. Emily closed her eyes slowly, feeling 2 hands, one big, one small, nestled into hers. And in that simple, sacred moment, they were home. A little boy found his smile again. A man dared to believe again. And a girl discovered a family she didn't know she was missing. Because sometimes the home we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one we build with patience, laughter, and late-night stargazing.